Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Krashy, and today we're going to go on ahead and give our thoughts, our first impressions, our review, day one thoughts on Azumarill, our newest all-rounder, water-type Pokemon, blue Easter egg, blue Pikachu. I can't think of any more ideas to call it. But yeah, let's go on ahead and talk about it. So, I played Azumarill last night on stream, and I got a pretty good amount of games in with it. I played it over 15 times just myself, so like a little over 2 hours, and just like really hammering away at the possibilities. I mean, the thing about these characters is that a lot of the characters in the game, there's kind of clear item paths, and with all-rounders, and certain all-rounders specifically, some of these characters, it feels like you can put anything on them. And Azumarill, we didn't have like damage numbers, we didn't have like scalings and things like that, like last night playing the character, on our first attempt at it. And so there was no real indication of what items were going to be the best. So you look at characters like Lucario, all-rounder, you look at characters like Serena, all-rounder, and there is a lot of build options, and it feels a lot like that with Azumarill as well. Now this will niche down and people will start finding the right build, so a lot of these early first impressions are going to be skewed because some games you're going to have like a much more optimal build than other, and sometimes you're just going to have a bad game too, or a really, really good game. So, the item build part of it is really, really tough. I think that this is the best way I can explain it. The character feels like you have one of two play styles. You either build it 2/3 defensive, 1/3 offensive, or 2/3 offensive, 1/3 defensive. So you can put on a couple damage items and say like a buddy barrier, or you can put on like a damage item and say like a focus band and a buddy barrier. And those were the two, like after I tried so many different items, that's the two like kind of build paths that I started to see. As for the actual abilities themselves, I didn't really care for Play Rough. Play Rough just kind of felt like it didn't really do a little bit of anything. It's like a Wild Charge or like a Volt Switch, kind of. Like you just kind of like dash at them and become untargetable, but it doesn't really do that much damage. And overall, for the entire character, because I haven't really said it, I just don't really feel like the character itself does a lot of damage. You just kind of run in. It feels like the all-rounder version of an Absol, but you're not even that tanky. And you just kind of like run in and you try to do some damage and you just die. The character feels really like almost kind of sluggish to play. It just feels really slow, and you really, from my perspective, I played it so many different kinds of ways, and I was mixing and matching and trying different items, and I just could like never find like a clear pattern with this character. I could never find the clear like, there we go, that's how we're doing it kind of moment. And it eventually got to the point where I was like, you know what, we have to find some consistency, right? So I was on the fence about using Scope Lens, and then it felt like, well, because the crits do less damage, like they do 100%, 150% rather than 200%, maybe raising that damage is good. And then it's like, well, what's the actual uptime on the crits? Is it actually high enough? Well, yeah, I think it's kind of high enough, but is that worth it than just bringing a muscle band? Or maybe you do both. Maybe you go full Garchomp, full Charizard, and you go muscle scope and buddy. And I think that that's a potential option. And so I think either way, no matter how you slice it, you can find the most optimal build, and it just feels like the character is going to have its job done, whatever that job is, by somebody else a little bit better. As far as all-rounders go, I think it's one of the weaker all-rounders in the roster. As far as the feeling of it being like a speedster, I don't necessarily think that it does that job particularly well as well, because it does feel very squishy, but it does have some good burst damage on it, like in surrounding the Unite move specifically. It feels a lot like if Serena or Absol were like kind of melded together. If you were to take those two characters and kind of mesh them together. Yeah, I just think that the character itself, the Pokemon, doesn't really do that much. Now, that's all like solo queue focused. I actually feel like this could be a kind of Lucario scenario where maybe in 5 stacks in like a 1-1-3 meta where you put this character top lane, it could be much, much more valuable. I don't think it's that much more valuable. I don't like see the ceiling of it like getting crazy and like it being like the #1 top laner or anything. but there are definitely scenarios, and I think this is worth talking about, where in North American competitive meta, you see a lot of Lucario players that go top lane that don't run defensive items at all. They'll run like an attack weight, they'll run like a weakness policy and like a muscle band, or like a razor claw or something like that. And that could be that scenario that ends up happening with Azumarill, but I just don't know, right? And either way, because of the way that ranked and matchmaking is set up, we don't really have access to that kind of gameplay in solo queue anyways. Like, it's very, very hard to run like a triple damage build and stack an attack weight on a character when you're playing like 2-1-2 in solo queue. It is really, really hard to pull that off. It's basically not really worth it to even try it. As for battle item, I feel like maybe something like X speed, eject button, full heal, something to give the character some additional mobility or anti-CC so you can kind of like dive in and kind of do its damage and deal what you need to deal with it. And the Unite move, we have to talk about the Unite move. I think the Unite move is 100% the best part about it. This character's Unite move has an incredibly fast charge rate. I think it's either the same or slightly faster than Pikachu's, maybe a little bit longer, but it felt very, very similar. It feels like you can spam this character's Unite move. I even got to the point where I feel like it's worth saying I tried Energy Amp, and maybe I'll revisit it at some point, but I didn't really care for it. Just like spamming the Unite move and trying to do a bunch of damage, didn't really care for it. But yeah, the Unite move is actually very, very good. I will say, I don't know why I'm not a huge fan of the sure hit targeting for the Unite move. Like, I'm down with the fact that it sure hits, and maybe it's just the range. There's something about the Unite move that feels a little funky. I think the range of it just feels really, really short, because you already kind of have to just like walk into them and like throw your life away. So it feels like a lot of the time whenever I'm going to fight on this character, I'm just kind of walking forward and like running to my inevitable demise. There is one build, however, that I didn't quite get to test, and it was just because we didn't really have scaling numbers, and we do have some of that information now. I do want to try doing something that's a little bit more like mixing the solo queue world with the 1-1-3 meta, where I do something like score shield, attack weight, and weakness policy. So we have some of the scaling numbers, and I might pop up some screenshots of that on screen now. And the scaling numbers they're not that impressive, but the reality is that they do bring some additional damage, and it does bring some additional healing to raise that attack stat. So maybe the character with like really big attack stat could be like slightly more damage dealing and slightly more tanky, because you're healing yourself more. But I actually kind of fear that you would just be super, super squishy and you would blow up. So I think for me, I'm kind of leaning a little bit more toward playing Azumarill on the sustain front, where I do something like maybe a weakness policy, a muscle band, or like a scope lens, and then you run double defensives where you go focus band, buddy barrier. And of those three offensive items, I'm not actually sure which one I like the most. Weakness policy would bring damage and healing, but it wouldn't be the most damage. Muscle band would probably bring the most damage, because percentage on hit damage is always really, really good for sure. That's a little bit good for shredding objectives and things of that nature. And scope lens is a big, weird, giant question mark on this character, because the reality with scope lens is that it's kind of bait, but it's kind of good no matter how you look at it, because you are increasing that crit hit damage. The crit hit rate on scope lens for Azumarill doesn't matter, but you are increasing that crit hit damage, and that's a fact. Like, you will get value off that item. The question is, like, are you getting the scope lens lottery on Azumarill for the game? Game by game. Is one game going to have a lot of crits in it, or is it just going to have some crits in it, depending on where people are positioning, how they're grouping, how you're approaching the fight, and things of that nature. So, I don't know. It's really, really interesting. So, friends, my overall thoughts, I think that this character is just kind of meh. It's just really, really meh. It feels pretty bad to me. I think anything this character can do, someone else will for sure do better. There's definitely better junglers, although it has a really good clear time. There's definitely better top laners, at least in the solo queue vibe, and that's kind of where I'm leaning into a little bit at the moment. And overall, for a 10k character, I think that if you're looking between this and something else, maybe for now consider something else. But it's fun. You can definitely win games on it, but I think that even like if you're looking at it from the rank perspective, I don't think it's the best pick. So I would maybe steer in a different direction. But I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts. Drop a comment, drop a like on the video if you wouldn't mind. Support this video, help it get out to some new people by showing it some support, and subscribe to the channel. I still have like half people that watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel, so I got to try to convince y'all. I do appreciate all the support. Friends, thank you so much for watching. As always, be sure to be kind to one another. Tell someone you love them, and I'll see you on the next video.